Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to, if you read the title, you know what I'm talking about. Basically, I listened, last year, January 1st. Or, no, December 31st, New Year's Eve. My resolution was, New Year's Eve 2023, my New Year's resolution was, I am going to listen to at least one album every single day for an entire year. And the idea behind it was to expand, my musical, like, taste, I guess, or just, listen to, more bands, because I had basically, been listening to Pink Floyd, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Led Zeppelin for the last 5 or 6 years. That those three bands were the only thing I listened to. And Genesis, had only been in that, last year. I only got into Genesis in 2023. And so the idea was, I am going to expand my musical horizon. Right? So literally, January 1st, I sat down and started listening to music, and I used the first part of that year to basically listen to all the Genesis albums I had yet to hear. I hadn't heard most of the stuff that they did in the 80s. I hadn't, all of the stuff they did in the 80s, and I hadn't heard of, and I hadn't heard We Can't Dance, and I didn't even know that Calling All Stations existed. And Calling All Stations, there will be a video later on this year that where I do talk about Calling All Stations. It's actually going to be, early, it's going to be in February, probably late February. But it's, again, that album's okay. But overall, what did I learn? Well, I learned that just because a song is 20 minutes doesn't mean it's going to be, pure prog rock excellence the entire time. Because Yes have an album called Tales from Topographic Oceans that came out the same year as Dark Side of the Moon. And it's 4 songs, and they're all, I think the shortest one's 18 minutes. And I don't remember a single moment from it, apart from the fact that it just kind of sounds vaguely like Yes. And, it's a double album. It's, an hour and a half long, and basically nothing happens during it. And I don't hate the album, it's just I really need to be in the mood for it. It's not a frequent listen, let me say that. But it is one of those ones where I do want it on physical media, just because I don't want an ad break after literally every song. The other thing is, I listened to Gentle Giant, a band that I hadn't even heard of before last year, or before this year. I don't know how to say it. It's January 3rd or 4th, whatever the fuck today's date is. I think it's the 4th for you seeing this. But it's one of those where... What? Oh, Jesus, I lost my train of thought. Gentle Giant, it took a minute for them to grow on me, and I haven't heard everything they did. They were only active for about a decade, from what I've read, and I don't know a single member or his name. It's just one of those where, it took a minute to grow on me, but once I did listen to it, I actually really enjoy some of their albums, particularly... I believe the album is called Three Friends, and it's great. Especially Peel the Paint and Working All Day. Those are fucking great. No, nothing at all can peel the paint. And you also might be wondering, what were some of the rules for this? Well, I had to listen to at least one album every day for a year. Right, and I had to, literally, I had to start from, opening song all the way to closing song. And it's, right, for example, if I want to listen to Dark Side of the Moon, like, I'm going to go from Speak to Me all the way to Eclipse, and you're gonna listen to it the whole way through. And typically the idea is you don't take breaks, maybe to piss in the middle of the album, right? So, generally the idea was no pauses. And if I wanted to listen to a live album, it either had to A, be a representation of what that band would play on tour. So, something like Pink Floyd's Pulse, for instance. Yeah. Or it had to be, a documentation of one particular concert, or one or two particular concerts where, like, the set list was basically exactly the same, right? So, any number of, like, I believe Frank Zappa has a live album called Halloween 1981 that was released in the last couple of years or so. So I like. That technically removes Seconds Out by Genesis from the option of if it's a true album that you listen to that day, right? Because there's a live recording of the Cinema Show on that album, and they did not play that on the 77 tour that it documents. That recording is from the previous 76 tour. And then right, and also compilations do not count as albums because they are best of compilations, not, like a new album. They might contain a few new songs, but they are not a new album of original material, right? So I have to listen to, the songs in the order that they were intended, and the form that they were intended, right? And it was great. I learned that not everything from the 70s was great. I learned that not everything from the 80s was trash. And I, did what I never thought I would achieve. I listened to everything, pretty much everything everybody in Pink Floyd has ever done. I think the only thing I missed out on was a couple of movie soundtracks and, the opera that Roger Waters wrote, and then he did a narration of some classic English, war tale or whatever. And those, were the 3 or 4 things that I didn't listen to. And I figured out, when it comes to the Floyd, I can now sort of detect when specific members, what specific members did this, wrote specific songs, so, their specific songwriting tropes. Roger Waters, he's very much a lyrics man. Not that he's a bad musician. He can be all right in moments, but, sometimes he'll have a song that's 8 or 9 minutes long. I'm going to use the example of the last 2 songs on Amused to Death, right? So those are, 8 and 9 minutes long respectively, or 9 and 10 minutes long respectively. They're both really long songs for all the musically dense they are. Right? The problem is they're not bad, but you only really need about, they kind of wear out their welcome after about, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. But because they're so damn long, that's only about halfway through the song, and Roger Waters wrote a whole fucking, goddamn notebook of lyrics just for this one song, and so it just goes on and on and on, and at the end of it, you're just kind of like, please stop. Just end already. And, sometimes you'll come across that with albums that aren't that interesting, but you're, already this far into it, might as well finish it. Right? Right? And if I missed a day, I would have to listen to 2 albums the next day. And that only happened once last year, and that's because the second day, the one day that I didn't listen to an album, I saw David fucking Gilmour. So, at Madison Square Garden, November 10th. I'll never forget it. It was amazing. But then the next day I got home, and I was very, very tired, and I listened to 2 Frank Zappa albums. And speaking of Frank Zappa, I love Frank Zappa. I learned that I really do love Frank Zappa. Even, the small percentage of his catalog that I've heard, because the dude has a lot. The man has a lot of albums. It's over 100. It's a lot, and that guy's essentially his own genre of music. And I've listened to, I think, 10 albums, and even then I found a stinker. You know, it's like the one album where it's like it has a 20-minute song on it, and it's like Gregory something, or like the Ballad of Gregory something, I don't know. But I don't really like that album all that much. Like, I've had no desire to revisit it since. I've also delved into Rick Wakeman's solo career, which is excellent. I've heard a couple of Peter Gabriel's solo albums. I've heard one of the Mike and the Mechanics solo albums. I've heard Phil Collins' first solo album. And it's, right, again, and, you know, some of those albums are pretty good, and some of them are like, yeah, okay. Like, I have no desire to go back and re-listen to that Mike and the Mechanics thing. You know, maybe I'll do that if I do a Genesis completion project, but we're going to hold off on that for a little while here yet. And I've found that, you know, albums are, like, even if it's not a concept album, something, like, if it's something, like, Genesis's Selling England by the Pound. Selling England by the Pound is not a concept album, right? But it just works incredibly well, like, to the point where if you perform any of these, you know, some of these songs without the concept of the other ones, like, let's say you perform, you know, Cinema Show and then end it with Isle of Plenty without, you know, without playing Dancing in the Moonlit Night first earlier on in the show, then that whole tie back with the melody, you know, it's nice and it still sounds great, and if you know what it is, it sounds great. But if you give it to somebody in isolation, you know, if you do Cinema Show and Isle of Plenty and you show that to somebody and that's their first exposure to Genesis, that's not Land of Confusion or, you know, I Can't Dance, or, you know, those 80s hits that they're aware of. Like, if that's their first exposure to Genesis, they might think it's cool, but they're missing some of the context. And that's why I do think, you know, people should listen to albums A to B. I really do think that is the case. So hopefully you've been able to decipher, you know, stuff that I've learned. I really have enjoyed doing it. It is a practice that I'm going to keep up. I'm going to nix the one thing about live albums. Like, from here on out, if it's, like, released as a live album, then that's just going to count as an album. Maybe I'll listen to another studio album that day. And that's something that I had to do a lot during the Pink Floyd completion project. At some points, it's just like, okay, I'm listening to this album for work, now I'm going to listen to an album for pleasure. Even though I'm not getting paid for this. I'm not popular enough, and I don't really think I'm putting in enough effort, really, to get paid. But sometimes that's just kind of how that project felt. But for now, I would like to thank you all very much for watching. I teased in my update video that was, you know, I've got, you know, 2 series coming up. And the first series that I'm going to do, that I can really only do because there's, you know, 5 Wednesdays in January. But the first one that I'm going to do is, it's called Debut Album January. And it's albums that come out, I'm going to go do 4 albums that were the debut albums of those specific artists. I'm not going to tell you exactly who yet, mostly because I really only have 2 solid ones, like, locked down, and and those are the first and last one that I'm going to look at. And then I have to, you know, I still have to figure out the middle too. I'm kind of cutting it close here, right? But, you know, I got a little while to do it. But for now, I would like to thank you all very much for watching. If you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like on it. If you have something to add, or, you know, want me to elaborate on something, please feel free to tell me in the comments down below. I would love to read it. If you want to continue along my musical journeys with me, please feel free to subscribe. If you want to hear me talk about something other than music, I have a podcast with 2 of my buddies. It's called Dorkies. I will leave a link to the most recent episode of that in the description down below. And if you want to hear what I happen to be listening to that day, or a 15-second segment at least, you can follow me on Instagram at Sean_Heaster1979. I post a 15-second segment of a song on my story there every single day. And with that, I would like to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.